Hello. Thank you very much for joining me today. How you doing? I really want to react to this video today. I mean, it's got a great title. It's really drawn me in. Okay, I need to know what the trade bazooka is. Should the EU use its trade bazooka against Trump? First of all, please don't. Okay? For God's sake, please don't. But I want to know what it is. What's the trade bazooka? I mean, I'm very concerned right now with the trade wars and think it's been honestly an absolute catastrophic disaster. It might be looked back upon as the beginning of a total disaster and splintering of the West. Maybe, I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully it all resolves. But Jesus Christ. All right, the trade bazooka, I need to know, what is it? Go check out TLDR News EU. I've seen some of this guy's videos. They're excellent. Usually I wait a long time to react to videos, but you know, these are pertinent. These are like news videos. So I can't wait a year. I need to know what the trade bazooka is now, because this could happen tomorrow.
All of America.
Whoops.
When Trump tariffed all of America's trading partners on Liberation Day, he said it was about reciprocity. In other words, he was only imposing tariffs as big as the ones that other tariffs had already imposed on the US.
Yeah, only half as big, right? Turned out that was just pulled straight out of his asshole.
Now, this was always implausible. After all, the 20% tariff he slapped on the EU was way above the 2% average tariff the EU has on US imports. And it looks like the rates were actually calculated using bilateral trade data, not other countries' tariff rates. Nonetheless, this is why on Monday the EU offered to drop all tariffs on cars and industrial goods, hoping that, in the spirit of reciprocity, Trump might do the same.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Trump wasn't convinced, and in a White House press round, he said it wasn't good enough.
I'm really afraid he's way overplaying his hand. Like I mean, Jesus. I could make a whole poker analogy, but I won't put you through that.
Because, quote, the EU was formed to...
Basically, he 3-bet, everybody else called, and then China raised, and he's like, oh shit. You know, and he had pocket jacks.
...really do damage to the United States in trade. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at how Trump's tariffs will affect the European economy, and how the EU will respond, given a zero-tariff trade deal doesn't seem on the cards.
Does that not seem on the cards? That's unfortunate. I wish it would just be like zero tariffs.
We're getting remarkably close to 1 million subscribers, and currently 72% of you haven't yet subscribed.
My bad.
So lend us a hand.
I am. Are you?
Subscribe today. So let's start by looking at how the tariffs will affect the EU. Now, admittedly, a lot is still unclear, and fully understanding or quantifying the impact of this tariff tsunami is difficult at the moment. With that being said, there's a pretty clear consensus that this will do some short-term harm to the wider European economy. In general, Europe exports a lot of stuff to the US, and Trump's 20% tariff will mean less demand for these goods, which makes up around 2% of the EU's GDP.
And I do have to say, you know, a lot of people, there was all this stuff going around when the tariffs were just a concepts of a plan, you know. Back in the good old days, it was like, oh, this will only hurt the United States. It's like, this is just going to hurt us all. It's probably going to hurt the U.S. the most. Well, maybe if you're like some small European country that happens to export a shit ton to the U.S., it might hurt you the most. But overall, like, the U.S. has the most to lose, it seems like. But yeah, it's just bad for everybody, really. It's just totally stupid.
And
in my opinion,
in the short term, the EU's GDP will likely contract by 0.3%, according to the ING. No other country can really replace the US in this respect. Americans consume more stuff than basically anyone else.
Hell yeah, we do. See, that's where, I mean, you guys make fun of how consumerist we are. It's like, ha-ha! It's actually good for you.
And the uncertainty created by Trump's trade wars will probably dampen consumer demand elsewhere. We should also mention that the effect of these tariffs will vary across each member state, depending on its bilateral trade with the US. In general, you should expect European countries that run the biggest trade surplus, like Ireland, Germany and Italy, to be hit hardest, while countries like France, Spain and Belgium, with which the US runs surpluses or small deficits, i.e. the US imports more from them than it exports, should be less affected.
I mean, if there's countries that have a trade deficit with us, then why are we even tariffing them at all? Like, even under that stupid notion that a trade surplus or deficit is essentially a tariff. If we have a surplus with a country, if they're buying more of our goods than we buy of theirs, then which he just said there are. It's like, then why do they even have a tariff? You don't make any damn sense. Because they're part of the EU?
On the other hand, surplus countries like Germany should count themselves lucky Trump applied a single tax to the entire EU. Because
yeah, I guess that's true.
if he'd calculated individual rates for each European country using the same method, they would have been hit with higher rates.
That's an interesting point.
Germany, for instance, would have been hit with a...
And like I said, the method is totally stupid. Totally stupid.
26% tariff, while Ireland would have been hit with an eye-watering 42% tariff. There were also a handful of products which have been temporarily exempted from Trump's tariffs, like pharmaceuticals, meaning countries like Ireland, which exports 58 billion euros worth of pharmaceuticals and chemicals to the US every year, will actually have an effective tariff rate far below 20%, assuming these exemptions are sustained.
Didn't he just say he's going to add in some pharmaceutical tariffs? That's part of the problem is no one knows what's going on. No one has any idea what is happening.
Vice versa, Trump...
It's like a great ape found his way into the Oval Office and is just pushing random buttons. Nobody knows what's happening next.
Trump introduced a handful of additional tariffs earlier in the year on European steel, aluminium...
That might be insulting to great apes. My apology.
...and automotives, which means manufacturing heavy economies, like Slovakia, will face extra tariffs at an effective rate well above 20%. Anyways, putting individual countries aside for now, Trump...
And can I just say, I've said this a million times, I'm not particularly political. I'm not even much of a political guy, but I mean, honestly, once Trump started doing shit like saying he's going to run for a third term, to me, that's like, no, get him out. And this whole tariff shit.
Trump's trade wars will also...
To me, that's not even political. That's just un-American.
...to exacerbate anxieties about Europe's deindustrialization, given that a large fraction of these exports are industry adjacent, and that Trump's 54% tariff on China risks inviting a flood of Chinese exports, as Chinese businesses that are now effectively unable to sell to the US market redirect their goods into Europe.
Look how big Alaska is. That's all I'm thinking right now. Holy shit. There's no way it's actually that big, is it? Alaska's as big as the European Union in size. Alaska's almost as... No, these aren't to scale. They just made Alaska really big. Because obviously Alaska is nowhere near as big as China, and the U.S. is not as big as China. All right. Well, now I keep talking, and I feel like I'm getting stupider as I talk. How big is the U.S. compared to China? There's China. Okay, it is the same size. Now there's Alaska. Damn, it is huge. I guess these actually are to scale. Why did I think that China was bigger than the US? I mean, obviously it's got way more people. I think that's why. Look how big Greenland is. That's a big state, guys. I'm just kidding. The 51st state, pretty big. Well, 52nd. Canada's the 51st, right?
Pushing prices down further, putting more strain...
I don't even know. What was he talking about?
...as Chinese businesses that are now effectively unable to sell to the US market redirect...
I like how this video being 13 days old, or 12 days old, 54% tariff. That's now like 140 or something.
As Chinese businesses that are now effectively unable to sell to the US market redirect their goods into Europe, pushing prices down further, putting more strain on their European competitors.
That's an interesting point.
Silver lining here is that a flood of cheap Chinese goods could bring down prices for
Yeah, that's interesting. It could cause deflation in the EU and inflation in America.
European consumers, and offset some of the inflation that might be incurred by tariff-related disruptions to supply chains. This puts the EU in somewhat of a stronger position than the US, where inflation is being compounded by tariffs-related disruption, a weak dollar,
That's actually super interesting. I didn't consider that.
and more expensive imports. This is why, after a meeting in Luxembourg earlier this week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Europe is always ready for a good deal, and, to stave off a trade war, offered Trump a 0-for-0 tariff deal for industrial goods. However, negotiations
I say just take it, man. Just take it, call it a win.
with Washington looks pretty futile. Earlier this week, Trump stated he's not interested in any talks unless the EU pays the US.
That's got to be an old video of Trump, is it? He doesn't look as ancient as he is now.
Earlier this week, Trump stated he's not interested in any talks unless the EU pays the US a lot of money on a yearly basis. And then, on Monday afternoon, he said a 0-for-0 deal was off the table. Instead, it looks likely the EU will have to agree on a set of targeted retaliatory measures. Broadly speaking, the EU can decide to either impose tariffs on services or on goods. And the way we see it, it will probably be best if the EU's retaliatory measures were focused on services rather than goods. This is because tariffs on token goods like Levi jeans or Harley-Davidson motorbikes, which is what the EU has gone for in the past, are only so effective. The Commission is currently considering tariffs of up to 25%.
It's interesting you guys import Harley-Davidsons. I hadn't considered that. Makes sense. You know, I know Europeans don't think that American cars are cool anymore. Right? I don't think so. Do you guys think a Cadillac is cool? I don't know. Probably not at this point, right? But Harley-Davidsons, maybe you do like those. Or some people, you know.
And on a broad range of US goods.
A lot of people hate Harley-Davidsons, even here in America. Just because they're so loud. I digress.
Including soybeans, almonds, and plastic goods. But this isn't going to stress the White House out too much. Things have been made much more difficult for the Commission here because individual member states have been lobbying for exemptions. France, for instance, has resisted measures against bourbon whiskey, whilst Ireland has asked for dairy duties to be dropped. Focusing on services might thus be more effective, not least because while the US runs a trade deficit in goods with the EU, it actually runs a trade surplus when it comes to services, which means the EU has more leverage in a services-based trade war. The EU would thus probably be better off cracking down on American tech companies, which is something Trump clearly doesn't like, or excluding American firms, including consultancies, banks and law firms, from government contracts. This could be done via the EU's new and as of yet unused anti-coercion.
Where is this? This is a really pretty... I like this dichotomy you have here between these like little village looking area with these cool houses and then these beautiful buildings. Where is this? Boom, boom, boom. Time to use my magic powers. Aha. Did it work? European Parliament, Strasbourg. Ah, that makes sense. That's the EU Parliament.
Instrument, dubbed the Trade Bazooka, which provides legal grounds for the EU to respond asymmetrically to economic coercion. But whilst the Trade Bazooka weapon sounds...
Okay, wait. What exactly was the Trade Bazooka? Sorry.
Firms, including consultancies, banks and law firms, from government contracts. This could be done via the EU's new and as of yet unused anti-coercion instrument, dubbed the Trade Bazooka, which provides legal grounds for the EU to respond asymmetrically to economic coercion. But whilst the Trade Bazooka...
So it kind of just is this part of the contract that says if you screw us over, we can do whatever. By any means necessary, we can respond. Got it.
A weapon sounds pretty effective. It requires the support of a qualified majority in the EU Council, meaning 55% of EU countries representing at least 65% of the total EU population. Whilst both France and Germany have expressed support for using the ACI, Other countries worry this could just escalate the trade war and ultimately do more damage to their economies. Politico reported earlier this week that when the EU trade chief Maroš Šefčovič did a straw poll, only a handful of EU ministers were in favour of the idea, with states like Ireland and Italy, whose pharmaceutical and wine sectors are very much at risk, resisting most vocally. Ultimately, this looks to be yet another test of the EU's cohesion, and Europeans should hope...
Yeah, I guess it's easier for some countries than others to want to escalate this deal, huh? Because this is really hurting some countries, or has the potential to really hurt some countries. So, kind of like how presidents and dictators send the, other people to fight wars. It's easier to say, oh yeah, go sacrifice yourself for the greater good. But when it's you, that's harder, huh?
The bloc can come to a consensus on its response, or risk being bullied into a bad deal by Trump. This story, like much of the news, is worth paying attention to in the week.
This will go down in infamy, this God-forsaken chart
ahead. Because with geopolitics in flux and Trump throwing the international order up in the air, there's a lot to keep an eye on. Every day we're faced with weird headlines, from Musk declaring anyone who looks at him the wrong way a terrorist, to Trump declaring war on Jupiter, to try to regain some extraterrestrial allies. Okay, that one isn't real, but we do dive into the weird world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's
This is a real thing.
Our show where we take big moments from culture and social media and try to explain the political implications.
Oh my God. Well, go check that out. I'm going to check that out. WTF USA. Please, can we have American cars to no European ever? Actually, back in the day, American cars, post-World War II, were considered, some of them were considered exotic and cool. Cadillacs. Buicks. That was back in the day, though. And from what I understand. I actually learned that not too long ago. I thought that was pretty interesting. How things have changed. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow.